Whether you are watching gameplay videos on YouTube, or the live streaming of your favorite streamer, or just sitting next to your closest friend and watching them playing games, sometimes watching others playing seems to be more enjoyable than playing by yourself. The reason why sometimes being a spectator is as enjoyable as being a player is that it offers viewers a unique type of aesthetic of play that cannot be experienced in solo play, which is reflected in ways that allow the spectator to, first, improve the understanding of the game through the interaction of different mental models. Second, enjoy the outcome without any cost. And third, obtain emotional resonance with the player and the game community. One enjoyment of being a spectator is learning by watching, and this improvement is the result of the interaction of mental models between the spectator and the player. To better illustrate that, we need to know what mental models are. In The Aesthetic of Play, Brian Upton explains this concept based on the standard model of play. In this model, the player observes the screen, input to the computer with the controller. The computer processes this input and outputs the result through the screen to the player. Upton states that when players are experiencing this input-output loop, they construct an internal model of the game system and use this model to plan out a variety of scenarios, imagining different actions and their potential outcomes. This mental model will shape our future decisions, which is anticipatory play. What would happen when spectators join? It's not simply an addition of another person, but also an addition of another mental model. When we are watching others playing games, we often substitute ourselves into the identity of the player and wonder things like, if I were him, what should I do next? What are possible outcomes? Thus building our own mental model. As the player progresses, they may succeed or fail under their mental model, and this is the point when the spectator mentally interacts with the player. Depending on the correctness and similarity of the two models, the spectator evaluates them by comparing and contrasting. And as shown in this diagram, the spectator can always learn more things about the game under this mental interaction. Take this case for example. Sometimes in esports, the professional players have correct strategies but are incomprehensible for normal audiences. Let's spectate this Hearthstone match. Suppose you support Super JJ. Your opponent dealt this minion, which can draw him extra cards each turn. What will you do? Feel free to pause this video and build your own model. Most players will choose to kill that minion, because in TCG, the more cards you own in hand, the more choices you have. However, what's unintuitive is that Super JJ intentionally didn't kill this minion, and surprisingly, this choice directly caused the opponent's loss due to his deck running out of cards 4 turns earlier after drawing 4 more cards. It was only then that the entire audience realized there was such a strategy for a battle between 2 controlled decks. When the professional player's model is proved to be correct, while the spectator's is not, the latter will realize and learn from the difference between their overall vision and the professional's far-sighted vision. In the last part, we discussed how mental model interaction creates enjoyment for the spectator, but even without building the model, as we will explore in this section, the spectator could still gain another form of enjoyment by obtaining the outcome of a game without any cost. Brian Upton and Brendan Keogh each noted in their works about the efforts needed in games. If a game is going to support anticipatory play, it must provide the necessary time for anticipation to occur. And video game players must habitualize different ways of moving their bodies at the video game. Both constructing mental models or become literate at using controllers require a certain amount of efforts from the player. The player infuses their efforts into the game as input, and the game outputs through the screen as score, rewards, and new plots. But as spectators, when we are watching this rhythm gameplay video, for example, we have direct access to the player's screen. All we have to do is to watch the screen and enjoy the output effortlessly. By spectating this effortless output, a lot of the costs when playing the game by ourselves can be eliminated. The most obvious is external costs, costs that are implicitly designed for players to overcome before even playing a game. Some games are too long to play, some have scary subjects, and some are just too expensive to buy. As spectators, these costs are excluded by watching a player playing a game. For instance, in the current environment and network resources, spectators can choose what they want to watch at will, and they can always be stopped, sped up, and rewounded at any time, thus selectively enjoying what they want to enjoy. Another cost that can be eliminated is internal costs, costs that have a strong connection with the content of each game, such as skill and concentration. In terms of skill, skills required by a game can directly restrict players' performance, and only repeated learning can enhance them. However, skill doesn't limit the spectator. Let's spectate this Tetris championship match. The Tetris techniques players are showing are extremely adept and require a lot of effort to achieve. What's exciting is, even though we as spectators don't have the same skill, we can still understand what is going on and enjoy the high-level game content. In terms of concentration, according to Graham Patrick's concept of the corrosion of controllers, repeated death or failures in game could break the coherence of gameplays, drawing players' attention from narratives to controllers. But for spectators, since the watched games continue no matter what, the failure they see is not an interruption of the game, but being a part of the game's content, allowing spectators to stay focused, and even more focused than the players, which may explain why sometimes spectators tend to react faster to puzzles than those actually playing the game. In the first two parts we discussed, the pleasure of the spectatorship is more directed towards a gain in the audience's knowledge and obtaining effortless experience. But there is another kind of enjoyment that cannot be ignored, as it is the emotional resonance with the player and the game's community. Mary Midgley stated in her paper, The Game Game, "Games are continuous with the life around them, and their selection is not at all optional or arbitrary. The restraining rules are simply the shape which the desired activity takes. The reason why a specific type of player plays a specific type of game is that the game is the medium through which the feeling we express could not be expressed elsewhere. Only ones from the same game community can communicate the language and emotion with other players in that community." Being a spectator, the game not only opens up a space for members to have access to the game on screen, but also a space for communicating their emotion with the spectators of the same community. The space can be either real or virtual, but it's always a space in which a small group of people from the community can find an emotional resonance. This could be reflected on two levels. On the spectator-player level, when spectators are imagining the game experiences of players, whether it's a dangerous situation or a difficult puzzle, they feel almost the same emotional development of the players. As we discussed, as the spectator observes the game screen, they are also observing the player's reaction, thus passively synchronizing their emotions as if they themselves are playing the game. If the player achieves victory, the spectators will cheer up, and likewise would feel relieved when the encountered problem is solved. On the spectator and spectator level, within a game community, the player and the game bring spectators together despite distance. Due to mimicry, spectators place emphasis on the on-screen reality, and through which they can communicate in the same game language. They express their opinions and thoughts, and participate in guessing which team is likely going to win, commenting on each other's choices, and exchanging ideas and views on specific moments. Thus, spectators largely utilize the community and fully express their ideas to find a resonance within the group, leading them to become more fond of the game itself or the player. Johann Huizinga defines Homo ludens as man who plays, and playing as an innate characteristic of humanity. How can we, as Homo ludens, find spectating more entertaining than play itself? As the video concludes, as spectators, we enjoy the satisfaction of when our own mental models are validated, even when they aren't, since it indicates our knowledge of the game is updated with new interpretation of strategies and possible scenarios. Another pleasure comes from the unnecessary need of efforts to sustain gameplay, as the player experiences the consequences of their own action, or their failure and success. We witness the same scenario, but with no constraints. Lastly, with spectatorship, we experience a sense of resonance between audience and players. We feel the frustration or excitement of the player as they play, connect through the medium of the game, and extend to the larger gaming community as a whole. With all said, The art of gaming is not simply what players experience, but also the experience of the larger spectating community. As modern technology advances, more and more media resources like Twitch and YouTube are developed to present us with methods to watch games for pleasure. This new experience is incomparable to those of movies and novels, as spectating games is more interactive than what it seems on the mere surface. For gamers like us, it's more than just watching, rather, it is entirely a playable experience.